All right, we're good to go.
There we go. Today we will be discussing ways that you can stay connected in today's flexible workspace. And this webinar is intended as educational information, rather than a replacement for medical advice or training. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we live, work, and prosper is Treaty 6 territory, the ancestral and traditional meeting grounds and gathering place for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, and we are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders. We've recognized the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside and gather on today. So I'd like to introduce our first presenter. Alex is a registered psychologist and has been counseling at Cornerstone since January 2021. And it looks like she's here now. What great timing. She works with adults, couples, and families who are struggling with various issues, including anxiety, depression, and trauma. One of the things she loves most about counseling is the privilege that comes through sitting with courageous individuals every day. So if you are interested in pursuing counseling with Alex, please visit our website, which is www.cornerstonecounseling.com. That was such perfect timing, Alex, like movie quality.
So sorry, everybody. Thank you for leading the way, Amanda and Michelle.
It's all good. We were saying it feels like Monday, so everything's all good. Okay, and our second presenter, everyone, is Michelle Devlin, who is the owner of Creating People Power. She is a certified CMHA psychological health and safety advisor and is also DISC certified. Michelle is an accomplished facilitator, passionate about fostering respectful workplaces and helping business professionals become better leaders. If you are interested in working with Michelle, please visit her website, which is www.creatingpeoplepower.ca. And with that, I will turn it over to you two.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And, we always talk about our values in our organization, like many companies, and one of our values is flexibility because life happens. So on that note, we're excited to get into the webinar for those of you that were able to join us live. So you can scan this QR code, or I suspect Amanda will put a link into the chat. This is a way for us, if you've never logged in with us before, to capture some anonymous responses. I know some of you have written in the chat, shared to everyone, shared to hosts and panelists. So Menti is a tool that we use in order to be able to capture responses just in a really safe way. So I will leave the secret code up for a second. And if you go to the website where there's a thumbs up, you're in the right place. And we'll do a quick test if some of you haven't used Menti before, just to kind of show you what it's like. And also for us to get like a bit of a vibe of the room, how is everyone feeling? So let's just see. All right. How about you pick an emoji that describes your mood today?
I'm curious to see what people are going to pick. That monkey is totally how I feel coming into this late.
Oh, that's really fun. Someone's feeling a little sleepy. You know what? I don't know if that's because of the late. It wasn't even a late Oilers game. Who am I to say? Okay. Yeah, I think for me it's just the weather. It was the weather for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you that have maybe already tried Menti, that's totally awesome. This is how it works. Super simple. And yeah, let's talk about a hybrid workplace. What is it?
Yeah, what is a hybrid workplace? I feel like Michelle, and probably so many of our participants can resonate with this. this term and these terms that you see in front of you, hybrid work, remote work, they're thrown around a lot, and sometimes they're thrown around like synonymous with one another. But I know in so many of our conversations, we thought it would be important to kind of differentiate between what's hybrid work, what's remote work. So our understanding of hybrid work combines elements of both in-person and remote work. It really focuses on allowing like flexibility for an employee. Perhaps someone works 2 to 3 days in the office, a couple days at home. Maybe they even work more at home, but come into office for important roles, responsibilities, and meetings. Hybrid work could even be a reduced work week, a 4-day work week. There's a lot of different ways that we see hybrid work. And on the other side of it, remote work is more so those jobs where you're working completely outside of a traditional office setting. So whether that be at home, another remote location, I know some people, and I'd love to have this role, are working fully from Cancun on the beach on their laptop, but their business is sort of situated within Alberta or Canada or what have you. So remote work is different than hybrid work in that. Tell me, Michelle, did I miss anything? Because I know you have a lot of connections that probably spill into each of these categories.
Yeah, I just like that we're starting off by defining it because I think it's really important. I've been a remote worker for many, many years, long before it became sort of, I guess, popular in the pandemic. And so I just like to make sure people understand the language because some people in their jobs don't have the ability to do remote work. If you're a first responder or if you're a construction worker, there's a requirement for you to be on site, which is why we're focusing our conversation today on hybrid work, because hybrid work is really giving people this flexibility that I think we talked about, many people are looking for. So we'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages and love to hear from those of you that have logged in. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on remote work and how it's evolved. I think will be an interesting conversation.
Good word. Yeah, it's evolution. I think it's really changed in the last 4 years, and is still changing. So, on that note too, I guess I'm curious on our next slide, we talk more around not only, is the focus for our conversation today, considerations for us as employees potentially doing remote work, but we speak a little bit too about considerations for employers. However, I might have jumped ahead because I know we're going into a mentee to kind of pose that question out to the group.
Yeah, let's just find out, how many people, just logged in here today, for those willing to respond anyway, work in a hybrid workplace. Do you have the option? I think there's a lot of people who might like it, which we'll get to in the next question, but maybe just don't have the option. Okay, so interestingly, out of the people responding, we have more people in a hybrid workplace, which I have to say doesn't really surprise me. Let's see sort of, if you don't work in a hybrid workplace, would you like the option of having that work? Yes. Oh, not sure. Interesting. So, there's lots of reasons I think why people aren't sure. I spoke with some people that do have sort of this ability to do remote work. And one of the comments that someone meant to me, actually just last week, we were having this conversation, is that they sometimes find they get too distracted at home with some of the things that are taking place, whether it be, other family members or just the fact that you have other chores, things to do. I know I like to garden, so I really need to focus my work hours and then my like gardening hours so that I'm really specific with what I do. So there's lots of reasons why people might or might not want an option. Let's speak to the yes, Alex, because it looks like more people, at least within this audience, who are willing to respond, would like that. And I want to start off by talking about the considerations for employers, because many of the clients that I work with, we know that many people today, when we look at the economics, whether we know this or not about our employees, there are many people that work more than one job. And it might be a part-time job in addition to their full-time job, or it might even be some of their commitments, volunteer commitments that, or family caregiver commitments that would that would provide an employee with some flexibility. People need a flexibility and they want it more and more today. Our roles have evolved and changed, and survey after survey within my industry, it's demonstrating that this is of utmost importance for employees. And we know, we'll talk a little bit about, sitting at a desk or in an office for 8 hours is not always a way to make people really productive. So I think what the research has shown over the last 5 years, where we've had more people working remotely more than ever, is that, you know what, different ways of working might actually increase productivity. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about how taking a look at the diversity and the different ways in which people are productive and want to do their work sort of relates to this hybrid workspace. I know, Alex, in the work that you do, when people come and chat with you about some of the challenges that they're having in life, you express this as something you're hearing more. Is that correct? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, so much more. You're absolutely right in saying that and assuming that. Yeah, I think a lot of people now are maybe sharing, I don't know if frustration's the right word, but that maybe some of the work schedule that they've typically had in the past isn't super understanding or conducive to like changes in their life, whether that be like physical health, mental health, responsibility. We, year to year, so many things in our personal lives can change, and yet our job and the constraints of our job sort of set out in the contract, until you leave the employment. And so people are asking more for those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll talk about that. So, when you allow people to work from home, it really does demonstrate as an employer that you understand and empathize with the needs that employees have in their life. So this relates often directly to a company's values. That's why I said at the outset, one of our values in our company is flexibility. And we want people to be able to, I know when my kids were younger, I would go on a zoo field trip with them in the afternoon. But sometimes that meant I would send an email to someone at 7 o'clock, not expecting a response. We have that conversation and agreement within our team. But just that flexibility to sort of do work at different times of the day in order to be able to be fulfilled in other areas of our life. We're going to talk a little bit about neurodivergence, and we'll define neurodiversity in the next slide. But there's lots of conversation right now about this ability for employers to, without really often a lot of cost, recognizing that people might need some accommodations. We also know that in flexible workplaces, that marginalized, and in particular, moms or dads can be more involved. And we also see that more types of employees can be part of a workforce when we take a look at flexible options. So, oops. Sorry, obviously I'm not a graphic designer, my bad. Neurodiversity. Let's talk a little bit about neurodiversity, because I know it's a term that some people on the webinar may or may not be familiar with, Alex. And I don't know if you sort of want to dive in. I can give you sort of a definition from my perspective, which is neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in different ways. So that definition comes from Harvard Health. Basically, if you want to think about it from a day-to-day perspective, neurodiversity really recognizes the different ways in which our brains work. So for example, within the last year or year and a half, I was diagnosed with ADHD, meaning that like right now I'm working from a standing desk. Sometimes I sit down, sometimes I stand up. It gives me that ability to be able to move, which I need, and then sort of focus differently on some of my tasks. There's lots of examples of neurodiversity here. I don't know if you have any examples that you want to share, Alex, or speak to neurodiversity.
The only thing I'll add, you've done such a beautiful job of like bringing the group and our guests into this, is that I find too, there's now been this change around neurodiversity of let's work with the strengths that people bring in based on the differences in brains. Instead of assuming we all operate the same way, someone with I'm looking at our little graph. I'll pick ADHD just because I know that's a big topic of conversation right now. Someone with ADHD may be able to work a lot more creatively. They have lots of ideas, maybe can work a bit more fast-paced, but need breaks too, and a little change in environment. And so working with those strengths instead of limiting or constraining the role will actually probably bolster, the workplace, a business, that kind of thing. So I love this change in language around let's be strength-based with the different minds that are working with us.
Yeah, that's really true. One of the members on my team also has epilepsy. And one of the discussions that she'll often have in a group is that it means that her brain works a little bit differently and she needs to process information. So she may not be able to always respond sort of on a moment's notice to a question because she might need to process that. And so just thinking about the ways in which, we best communicate is sort of another example of some of the categories that we sort of talked about when we think about neurodiversity. And I just want to speak finally to, other ways that we can be flexible. So when we're talking with employers, one of the things that we try to encourage them to do is to be creative with what they can do with work schedules. There's lots of research around a 4-day work week. I have a few clients who piloted a test drive for 6 months to a year of a 4-day work week and now have moved to that. They're finding it extremely productive, and we'll have some resources at the end of the webinar to share on science that supports how much more productive people are on a 4-day work week. Another thing we've had clients do is implement job sharing. So oftentimes if you have, for example, I'll use parents who want sort of half-day work schedules. They'll have 2 people working sort of quote one job, and then one person can work mornings, one person can work afternoons, and it sort of fits everybody's schedule in this nice and really comfortable way. And it's something that actually with this one client I'm thinking about, the 2 employees brought forward because they were having a lunchtime discussion about some of the challenges, and the employer was open to trying it. Another one, which I'm going to admit, Alex, some employers cringe a little bit when they see this, is offering unlimited 6 days or paid time off. And the first response is, we can't afford that. We need to have people here. And what the research shows is companies that do offer unlimited time off actually have employees that take less sick days. And it's correlated to the fact that people know that they have the flexibility. And so this trust that is given to them is actually brought back to the employer through the fact that, most people don't take advantage of that system if it's offered. So super interesting. Maybe people want to throw in the chat some other things that they've experienced or would like to see, and we can sort of refer to those. Any thoughts on your part, Alex, about that?
These ideas, and see, there's where my limitations come in. We're all so wired to think about productivity and the conservative or the kind of normal stereotypical work schedule. And so even these ideas are also new to me. So I don't have anything to add, but I am very curious if anyone else has anything to share that they've seen, heard of. Yeah.
And I'm gonna leave for the employers that are logged in, or some of the supervisors that might be listening to this webinar. I think what really the point is that we're trying to make, or the key concept, is that people are looking for control over their schedule, or at the very least, the autonomy to be able to make decisions, especially when it comes to the other roles and responsibilities that they have in their life. So, what the research shows is that when employees are given that flexibility, they don't tend to take advantage of it. So we thought, before we sort of dive into the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages, we thought we would ask you, like, from your perspective, as someone who either has the ability to work remotely or doesn't, what are some of the advantages that you see, or disadvantages, in terms of remote work? Maybe Alex, you can speak to what you hear if it doesn't come up on the slide.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just reading some of these responses.
Mm-hmm.
Mute. Yeah, I think especially now with like traffic, if you are in a major city, there's always construction on your commute.
Mm,
Gas prices. There's I guess I'm thinking in terms of domains, advantages and disadvantages. There's like the financial advantages. Yeah, even someone saying less rent for employers.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess too, that's it's interesting incorporating a daily lunch hour walk. Um, Depending on your lunch hour, even if you're in office or out of office,
Mm-hmm.
being able to incorporate that would be super important.
I would say that for me has been, I do that. I don't know who wrote that in, but I do that. I find that at noon, if I force myself to take my dog out, it gets me away from my desk, which I did not frequently do when I was in an office. So that could really be a health benefit.
Oh, totally. Yeah, interesting the domains like health, finances, um, just even your mental health, like maybe less stress, someone's
Mhm.
able to do laundry. Like if in between a
Oh
meeting, I have
yeah.
2 minutes and I can put the wet clothes into the dryer, takes less out on my plate for the evening, and I can enjoy time with, my partner or my family.
Hmm. I like the idea too of being able to like swim or work out at less busy times. That's really interesting. These connections, yeah. So I'm glad that a couple people, Alex, have mentioned the connection, because I think that is the whole reason we decided to host this webinar, is that we want people to stay connected, and we want to acknowledge that sometimes that can be difficult if
Hmm.
you're doing remote work, or you have sort of this hybrid work. And maybe you and I, on our days in the office, we never see each other, so therefore it might be tougher for us to stay connected. Okay, love your examples. Thanks so much, everyone. We're going to dive into sort of some of our thoughts, and what we see as some of the disadvantages, which you've already mentioned. So go for it, Alex. Let's go through these.
Yeah, lack of connection and isolation being really big ones. Um, just not having that face to face, even sometimes, I know we've talked about it in webinars before, that like hello or that acknowledgement as you walk into the office with another employee, like even that one micro exchange can be so important. And so finding like that lack of connection and creating a new routine and rhythm of how you fill that cup up can be hard transition when people go to remote work or more like hybrid, being at home, not getting out of the house. Yeah, having to be super mindful of breaks. Whereas maybe in the office, people knock on your door, you have to get up and grab something at the printer. There's kind of those smaller breaks implemented. I know a lot of people during COVID, when we were all remote, were really struggling with the idea of taking breaks during their workday when at home. Space issues. even finding that space, maybe you have the luxury of having this beautifully Pinterest curated office at home, but I know that's not always the case. So having like a comfortable office space with privacy and confidentiality issues. I know for my role,
Mhm.
one of the reasons why I enjoy coming to the office is because if I have family at home or my son or what have you, sessions, people could hear little bits and pieces of sessions. And so really having to be mindful of privacy. The mental load, this is kind of dependent on the
Mm,
personality. I know, again, someone wrote in the
mhm,
comment there, being able to do some chores can help alleviate stress. But I also know for me, being at home, I see the to-do list of things that need to get done. And so coming to work can be a bit of a break or an escape from that. So being in that might add overwhelm for some folks. A lack of control when we're working remotely too, not being able to, um, I don't want to say have much of a say, but maybe lack of control and just not being able to connect as much or sharing as much, and lack of trust as well. I think when building those connections, you really start to get to know a person, but from
mhm.
remote, um, especially if you don't have a lot of Zoom interactions or meetings, you're trying to gather and understand who your colleagues are through very minimal kind of touch points through email, and that can absolutely create a lack of trust. Any
Yeah.
thoughts as I'm saying this, Michelle?
I think the confidentiality is a really big issue for employers to take into consideration and employees. I mean, if you're having private discussions about files or clients or anything, this is where sort of headphones really come into being advantageous and just taking into consideration like how safe is my workspace and what does that look like. So although there are a lot of cons, Alex, or there can be some cons, I know that there's also lots of advantages, and I think part of what we want to do is balance this, and by the end of the conversation get to like what can we do to sort of make sure people stay connected. So let's talk about some of the pros. People listed some of these in there, but from your perspective, what do you see? What are you hearing as some of the biggest advantages from your clients?
I think less stress and feeling, I goes
Mhm.
back to that word of control, feeling more in control of their lives.
Yeah.
Things happen, whether that be you're a caregiver, a parent, a guardian, maybe you have your own medical stuff going on. Being able to know that my appointment's at 10. I usually work at that time, but I can go do that and come back. I still have a job.
Mhm.
My employer even encourages me to focus on those priorities. Like that, just flexibility helps people feel so much more in control of
Yeah.
different situations, the different life
Yeah.
circumstances that they've got going on. Yeah, that's a big, big one. What about for you? I know we have our list here and people can read through it, but what do you see as people's kind of favorite parts of being able to have that?
I think right now it is, to your point, just that flexibility that people have for schedules, trying to get kids to soccer or baseball or whatever they might be doing. And that third item of cost.
Mm.
Not paying for gas. Some of my colleagues have gone down to one car for family because they have the ability to work remotely. So now they're saving on insurance, they're saving on fuel, they're saving on parking, like all of these things that in this economy right now are really, really providing peace of mind that an employer, may or may not know employees are struggling with. So if you're an employee, I always encourage people to speak openly with their supervisor or someone in their organization that they trust to share this. But I think it's also important to keep in mind as supervisors that, we all have things going on in our lives, and that some of these opportunities for hybrid work might provide a benefit that we don't know or see. And I would encourage companies to have conversations around these topics, just like we are today, so that we can get insights into that. Um, we do know, and I think you're going to cover a little bit about sort of the considerations and things we need to keep in mind when we talk about hybrid work, Alex, before we dive into some of the challenges.
But even as you say that too, the considerations and employers broaching these subjects more, I love that you keep coming back to this place of going to the person first, because even too, if someone
Yeah.
just implemented, all of a sudden the whole organization has this flexible hybrid approach, there's probably people that don't want that, but really doing that
Absolutely.
into one, what works best for you as my employee. Some
Yeah.
considerations, of course, policies may differ for different departments. As you said at the beginning, Michelle, there are some jobs, there are some roles or a part of your responsibilities where you may not be able to work remotely. If you're in payroll, having to come in,
Mm-hmm.
count the funds from the week prior, the day prior, you need to be present for that. And maybe your work is the safest location. If you work in healthcare, your patients are at the hospital or you have to go in the ambulance. So there's different policies depending on departments, but the consideration might be, okay, if I can't be fully flexible, how might we be able to weave some of that into the role that I have? Other consideration, some people's work, there may be more room to negotiate or ask for things depending on your role and the contract that you have. With this one too, the more room to negotiate. What might you say as a consideration, Michelle? Not to put you on
Well, no, I have an example that I think is really interesting. So, bereavement leave. Bereavement leave with employers is generally sort of extended to immediate family, excuse me, and maybe a little bit further. I have one client who redefined their bereavement leave. And the reason they did that is because some individuals were really struggling with losing a pet. If you have a pet and whether you have a partner or a family, sometimes the loss of a pet can really be impactful. It has been for me. And so one of my clients looked at their bereavement and said, you know what, we're going to include the loss of a pet into our bereavement leave, which employees were so grateful. So, sort of that negotiation came about because someone at this place of employment did lose their pet, and they asked if they could use it under their bereavement. And initially, the employer said no, that doesn't qualify. But upon further conversation, they said maybe it should. So, I thought that was a great example of negotiation.
That's brilliant. And I think too,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it would depend on the values around the place that you work, but I think too around like this contract, we may not be able to anticipate the flexibility that you need in the future, but this is a working document. You sign it
Yeah.
today, but if you want something added to this, like let's have
Mm-hmm.
about that. So being very open. I think that's so beautiful, Michelle. That gave me goosebumps. I love
Yeah,
that.
it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know too, a lot of contracts around off like that are very they're sort of set things. So a lot around parenting roles, but even what about being a caregiver?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people caregive for elderly family members, and time off may be needed for that. That sick time is mine. I don't want to use it as I take them to appointments, but I also have this responsibility. So weaving that in as you need to negotiate. I know this third piece, just consideration around like higher productivity, burnout mitigation, more efficient use of time. I know a lot of the research shows that those 4-day work weeks, people get the exact same, maybe even more work done than in a 5-day work week.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's that myth around, okay, but people aren't going to do as much. And we found that to not be true.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting. There's a question to us in the chat about sort of, I know of some organizations that have a requirement where you need to log, like, what are you doing for the 40 hours that you're at work? And, the reality is we are human. We are not going to be productive for every minute of the 40 hours that we're being paid at work. And so that then, to this third point, becomes extremely stressful and can be a cause of burnout, which we've covered in a different webinar. So if you're interested in that topic, you can look at our webinar library. And the question is really about, is that something that could be considered a valid accommodation for ADHD? I think that is a better conversation to have with someone like sort of with a human resources background or someone within your organization. Maybe even if you're diagnosed with ADHD, like lots of general physicians are really well versed on these conversations around mental health and around neurodiversity because it's more common and it's more often talked about. So I guess it really depends on, from my perspective, the relationship that you have with your supervisor and or employer. I'm going to speak larger because I know some people don't feel comfortable talking with their supervisor and being willing to have that conversation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about navigating these challenges. I think that's probably a pretty good segue. I do want to speak to this sort of out of sight, out of mind, because what ends up happening is there's a lot of people that we recognize. Oh, I've seen Michelle in the office and geez, she's really been excited about that project. So maybe she should be the first one eligible for the promotion or for additional work. When sometimes the people who are not physically coming into the office are working just as hard, making just as many contributions, but because they're not sort of front and center, there's this bias that at times can be given to people who are in what some people have referred to an inner circle or people that we frequently see. So we want to talk a little bit about that, about how do we create this connection? And it's important to maintain connection both for people who work remotely and for people who are in the office. There's a lot of assumptions that are made too around employee mental health. I know, Alex, if I were to ask you today, hey, like, how are you doing? How are you most likely to respond to that question?
Fine. Yeah, the very
I'm
simple. Fine.
I'm good. I'm fine. And so the challenge with remote work sometimes is when we can't see that, I have bags on my eyes, or that I'm feeling a little bit differently, the body language, right? There's this perception that, we've kind of got it all together when maybe we don't. And that ability to connect, whether it be virtually in person, is super important. I think the other point that I kind of wanted to make here when we talk about this is we sometimes assume that people can take on work. And I'm going to use myself an example. I sometimes even offer to take on tasks or work, but that doesn't mean I'm actually capable of doing it. And so sometimes when we're not as connected with our employees or with our coworkers, we might be inviting them to do tasks or asking them for help, and they feel like they want to say yes, but we haven't actually checked in, and maybe they themselves, I'm guilty of this myself, Alex, I haven't checked in on, do I actually have the capacity to manage that right now? Just because I so badly want to stay connected to my coworkers. So yeah, I want to throw that out there.
I'm glad you did, because I feel too that goes into kind of like, how do we address these challenges? This is a real challenge, and how to be mindful of that. We kind of have these 4 points here, and I imagine the list of our recommendations could be much longer. We could have a big discussion on that. You could have another webinar. But setting clear guidelines. And that might be, again, some of these could be whether you're the employer or the employee, but if I'm coming from like kind of employee side of things, setting clear guidelines around what works best for me. If we have a weekly check-in, maybe I know Monday morning I need to kind of get my bearings and look at my week ahead, but Wednesday is the best time to kind of do that check-in. Even too, as the employer side, if there are team meetings, deciding whether those are in person or virtual, there could even be a mix. It could go back and forth every other week. I know, Michelle, in our conversations around this, you had spoken to even guidelines on kind of how we time things. So meetings, typically we think of 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Mm-hmm.
some things can even be smaller chunks of time, whether that be 15 minutes, half an hour, but really
Mm-hmm.
communicate well, whether you're an employer or an employee, with what works best for you and how work might be done most effectively. And again, I think overarching with all of these goes back to the piece of building off of my strength and the strength of others. How do I know that I work best? And being able to know that within myself and then communicate that to people. Any thoughts on those first two pieces?
I like the concept around guidelines, and I think from an employer standpoint, I'm going to take that concept even a little bit broader and talk about, like, if you're looking at your policy, make sure that they're consistent, that they're enforced consistently, and then making sure people really understand that policy. Like, what is it? What can we do? And if you don't understand the policy, or if you're an employee, ask. Like, be sure to ask questions, right? What does this look like? Would, this type of leave qualify, or this type of break qualify? Like, I think it's really important for people to ask the questions and get an understanding. The places that I've seen do this most successfully actually have open mic moments, or town hall, where they'll launch a policy, or they'll have a discussion even prior to the policy about what sort of questions, what can we look for, what are you looking for, so that people have an opportunity to give some input and then talk about what accommodations they're looking for. Something like what I have, a standing desk, is something that maybe some employers haven't even thought of, but super easy. If I don't let people know that's important, yeah, you may not know.
Brilliant. Just including people in the conversation through town
Yeah.
hall. I know some places do anonymous surveys or feedback form.
Yes. Yes.
Not everybody may be as comfortable sharing, but yeah, just having
Absolutely.
openness to include people in changes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think too, check-ins, like that goes into communicating, how
Mm-hmm.
regularly do you need check-ins? Or
Yeah.
from the employer side, knowing that people who are remote or more hybrid at home, knowing that they could be missed, that out of sight, out of mind, how do I be more intentional about checking in? Maybe I don't email, how are you doing today? Or Slack or Teams, how are you? Because it could
Yeah.
just be, I'm doing okay, but how do I actually encourage more check-ins and encourage my employees to also feel like they can broach the subject of checking in and sharing? Work distribution, Michelle touched really well on that previously as well, around like, how can work be distributed? Can people share roles? How do we know if someone's feeling overloaded? People often, in my experience with clients, people share with their employer that they're feeling overloaded when they've reached that point of burnout. So how do we proactively
Mm-hmm.
ensure that we're checking in and having those conversations ahead of time?
Yeah, I would agree, Alex. I think that proactive element, the challenge that we're seeing in employers is, everyone wants to talk about burnout when it's a little bit too late. So making sure that we're having these conversations, and the check-ins are a big part of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to talk a little bit about adjusting to in-person work, because one of the challenges that we're hearing come from individuals is, employers are saying, okay, it's time now. We're all coming back to the office. There's no more remote work, or, only maybe you have the hybrid workspace where you're allowed one day at home. And some people are really struggling with this, Alex, because they have made an adjustment to a remote work lifestyle, or a hybrid work lifestyle, and now they're saying, I can't make this work. So how can you address that would be to ask for flexible options and support with reasons why. um, Everyone's going to have individual scenarios as to why they might need that, but this really starts with a conversation around helping your employer understand why it's important. Um, and then the question becomes a little bit about, now had the conversation, maybe it becomes a bit of a negotiation. Can we run it on a pilot or a trial for a little while? Are there ways in which we can include others that also are asking for some of the same things? So trying to figure out and negotiate what might work best, not just in your scenario, but taking into consideration the needs of maybe other members on your team and or others within the workplace. And I really encourage people to do your research. We'll provide some links at the end of this webinar, but there is so much information, and you would not believe how creative people have become with a hybrid workplace in order to be able to make it work. So whether that's leveraging technology, whether that's sharing jobs, as I had mentioned before, whether that's trialing. I have one individual that I know of who they work their lunch hours so that they can have a half day off to be able to go see their mom and to help them fill a caregiver role. And their employer has agreed to that. So again, I think it's just about sharing and figuring that out together. I don't know, any thoughts from your perspective? Like sometimes this is about starting small, right? Not asking for everything at once if your employer or your supervisor isn't as flexible. But
yeah, I loved your point too of it can be overwhelming, but feeling like you have confidence into those conversations, doing the research, maybe even backing up a little bit as to why, like, this is important to me, but this is actually going to help me be able to be here better. I'm going to be more efficient. If I can't take my mom, I'm going to be super stressed about that. I won't be here mentally, but being able to just share with your employer the reasons why it's going to help you as an employee be better suited to this role, I think can be really good talking points. Oh, good thoughts, Michelle. And go ahead.
Sorry, it just came to mind. I was doing some training in the last couple of weeks with an employer, less than 20 employees, and the owner of the company during our training session, like at some point, popped out twice, once to get her mom to an appointment and once to get her daughter to an appointment. And I felt like that was just such a great role model because it was literally like an in and out. It would kind of be like a coffee break. They live in a small community, so it was a really quick thing. But I just thought, what a great way to say, yeah, these are my needs in my life right now. And I just felt like it was a good role model. So I thought I would share that.
I'm so glad that you said that, Michelle, because actually that sparked a memory that I just have right now from a training I was just in. I was in this intensive training and lots of women, lots of counselors. And one person in my cohort, their son kind of popped in and you could hear he was crying in the background. And I know sometimes with trainings or meetings, there's this pressure of, oh no, I don't want them to think I'm distracted. I need to make sure my kids stop crying. But the trainer was like, please bring your son in. It wasn't anything confidential that we were talking about. And she's like, he can sit with you. He just wants to be with you. And it was such a warm, welcoming change I had not experienced. And I thought, just more flexibility to people's lives and the reality.
So, I mean, we wanted to leave, Alex, this webinar on helping people navigate this ability to create social connection, because the social element is so critical in a hybrid workplace. I mean, we've given different options and we've talked about pros and cons, but what we really want to leave people with, and we'll give you an option on the next slide to share some ideas, but we wanted to share some of our ideas. So why don't we dive in, Alex, some ways, the importance of social connection. Maybe you want to speak to that from a mental health standpoint, and then we can share some of our examples.
Sure thing. I will do just a short mental health piece, but as humans, we need that social connection. And I know for some of us, maybe maybe it's not in your desire to get that from your workplace, and that's okay. This webinar is not to
Yeah.
pressure you to find connection in your workspace, but if you're working from home, you live alone, or you don't have that connection, maybe sitting with yourself and asking, like, how do I make sure I get that cup filled? If I don't need that at work, where in other areas of life do I find that? But then too, Michelle, a lot of these examples here come from your experience of social connection with remote work. Tell us a little bit about like water cooler event and the virtual ice cream. That one's my favorite.
Yeah, mine too. I love that one. I refer to it all the time. And I am really glad that you mentioned that, Alex, that some people will not fill their bucket with social connection at work. So to know really what you need and to just make sure you're taking time for that. I do want to reference the Vic. One of my clients did virtual ice cream Thursdays, and they used to do them in the office. And when everybody started working remotely, they started doing them online, and they have offices all across the US. And what was very interesting is they would just have a theme. So, like we started off our chat today before we started recording, what's one of your favorite local restaurants, and what is your favorite ice cream flavor? What is your favorite place to go on vacation? And what they found is there was great conversation, but there would be many people who would log in and never say anything. And so they reached out to some of those people and said, hey, like, I've seen you at the last 4 VIX on Thursday, but you never say anything. And their comment is, yeah, it's just a nice way for me to get to know my coworkers, but I'm not always one who needs to speak up. So it was really eye-opening for the employer and also the employees to be able to see what it takes to help people feel connected. And come on, who doesn't like ice cream? I mean, I guess us dairy-free folks, we can have sorbet those days. So you can do them on Zoom. You can have this discussion on different topics. And a water cooler event is really just sort of like a 15-minute connection. Some of my clients do them before meetings. So if you're having a town hall or you're doing something virtually, you invite people to log in 15 minutes before. I have one client who they play fun music and they'll just sort of catch up. What are you doing this weekend? So it doesn't take any time away from the meeting, but it allows for some social time for people who maybe don't get to see each other in the office. So there's kind of these little creative ways. I do encourage sort of these consistent check-ins with remote employees, whether that be once a week, once a day, depending on your job. But there's some really cool ideas, and we wanted to get your ideas. Like, I know that some people have intentionally gone back to many in-person activities now, Alex. We have many, many requests for in-person training that incorporate an element of fun. So we'll have an education element, maybe it's around our job or learning some leadership skills. And then we all go to a ranch and do horseback riding, or we just have a casual dinner. Maybe we have a breakfast before the training. Like, just this ability to do something that isn't related and creates that social connection so that we can learn about each other and the things that we love to do.
I like that, mixing the two. Yeah.
Barbecue, barbecue is I would say a pretty common one. Barbecues and breakfasts, we see those a lot. This idea of a book club is a cool one. I like that.
Oh, even too, I know sometimes when we have these work events, it can feel like we have to be on and talk about work. And so these are even giving me ideas around like a book club could be something totally not work related. We could pick if we're in like a helping sector, let's not read a self-help book. Let's read something fantasy and just
Yeah,
encourage kind of a different way of connecting with people.
yeah,
Walking.
totally.
I like the idea
Mm.
of meetings. That's so smart.
Mm-hmm. I do these a lot, actually, walking meetings. I'll always encourage people, if we're close by, do you want to have a walking meeting? It incorporates that element of health, gets me out of my office. And, if I don't have to take notes, it's just a great way to get some fresh air. And sometimes we encourage people when they have courageous conversations that this is a great way to do it, because you're not sort of in your stressful work environment, and sometimes not have like being present but not having to make eye contact with someone is an easier way. So walking meetings are good. Cameras on, yeah, I know. Jenga and bocce, those are fun. A weekly show and tell. These are all really great suggestions. Any thoughts from your perspective, Alex, on any that you've been a part of that you really liked?
I've been to some show and tells, and I have always really loved, you can see people's playful and fun sides come out, kind of their inner child, or maybe it's not that, maybe it's something like a quirky little trait, just how interesting to see what people bring to these. It's always such a fun surprise.
Yeah, I love that.
I,
Good
I
point.
did work for a place. We had a once a month adventure day. And so one person in the adventure kind of group, not everybody had to join. One person took the lead and they would plan an adventure kind of evening, afternoon after a work day. And we would go either to like a speeders race car or like
Fun.
wine tasting, outdoors.
Super fun.
Yeah. So just kind of
Yeah.
different ways.
Yeah, well, we've got some really great ideas here. Love the local museum tour factory. There's so many microbreweries. Even if people don't drink, you can get a lot of non-alcohol options now. So those are really neat ways of supporting local. And if we get any more that come through the chat, we will be happy to share them. So I guess we kind of want to leave you with this thought. Like, I mean, Alex has already referred to it, is have you given thought to really what you need for social connection, and maybe what level of support that you need? And then, once we have that level of self-awareness, Alex, it's so much easier for us to then, I think, look and go, what do others on my team need, right? And if they need something different than me, how do we adapt to make it work, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the psychologists say? I think you've already given us a bit of insight, but
I was just speaking to this morning too. We talk about basic needs, shelter, food, water, but human connection, feeling heard, seen, understood. And that sounds very therapisty, but I firmly believe like that's a core necessity for our well-being. And so a lot of research shows when we feel connected, especially in the
yeah,
workplace, we do better. So
yeah.
there's science backing that.
Well, you're right. So there's lots of ideas. You can use a tool like Menti, which we use today. There's many options, whether it be, doing a cooking class together with some other ideas. And who knows, maybe you even do it virtually. I know I meet monthly with one group, and what we do is we have one good thing. And it's really brought our team together. We share one good thing that either we're looking forward to or that's happening to us. It can be professional or personal. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes, and it's just a really nice way to get insight into people's lives. We will share these resources with those of you getting the recording and who have logged in today. And as always, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to close off our session today. And on behalf of Alex and I, just thank you so much, Amanda, for being here. And to all of you who logged in or who are listening to this recording afterwards, we really value having you as part of our community.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you both for hosting. That was so excellent. So what we'd like to leave you with is to encourage to provide feedback about the session. You can just scan that QR code and it will take you to a Google form. Also, if you want to get in contact with either Cornerstone Counseling or Creating People Power, our phone numbers and websites are listed on this slide. We do have a couple upcoming support groups at Cornerstone. So we are offering a healthy relationships group for women who are 18 to 23, and that's free. So if you know anyone in that age group, please encourage them to come. Thank you so much and take care.
Thanks, everyone.